So my talk is, in some sense, I'm going to continue on the themes that Laura already talked in her talks about Berkeley's theory of vision, and perhaps more importantly, I'll talk about the things where Berkeley kind of ends the treatment of vision, both the new theory of vision and theory of vision vindicated, namely the connection between the ideas of sight and the ideas of touch, which according to Berkeley are entirely heterogeneous. Very curious thesis. And what I want to do is to see some of the prehistory of these so-called judgments, or natural judgments, as Malebranche calls them, and Berkeley also uses the term judgments, which are supposed to do the connecting between the ideas of sight and the ideas of touch. So that's a central concept for Berkeley, it seems, and he kind of ends there. It doesn't really open the content of this concept. So I try to say something about it by looking at Berkeley's predecessors, who happen to be within this so-called geometric theory of optics, which is a theory that Berkeley rejects. But it seems to me that, in fact, the resemblances are quite significant between Berkeley and Descartes and Malebranche and Locke. And I think the talk is to some degree also connected to what Tom was saying, although to some degree antithetically. Tom was emphasizing the facility of perception in Berkeley and the role of imagination. I'll also end up talking a bit about the role of imagination, but it seems to me, I will be concentrating on Berkeley's works on vision, so I won't be referring to the so-called metaphysical works. And it seems to me that imagination plays an important and often neglected role in the early works on vision, which is pretty much the opposite what that does in the later works that Thomas did. Okay, so I have roughly 20 minutes. Okay, great. So the project of the new theory of vision and the later theory of vision vindicated is basically the negative part of the project. This is something that Laura already touched in her talk already. The negative part is to show that the prevalent theories of vision at Berkeley's time, the so-called geometric theories of vision, fail. They are not proper theories of vision. The positive part, which takes most of the time, is to offer a new theory of vision, which has often been labeled psychological. Berkeley doesn't use the term. And these two theses are connected in a sense that examples that Berkeley gives, which are supposed to show the shortcomings of the geometric theory of vision, are also such that he strongly believes that his theory can account for them. So it's a proper scientific theory of vision, but it's a different kind of theory of vision than the previous ones. I'll say briefly in what way. And the previous theory of vision is not just idealization of something more robust that's going on, but Berkeley, I think, really thinks that it's false, that it gives you false results in some important cases, most importantly the so-called Barrovian case. Also, it's unable, according to Berkeley, to explain the so-called inverted routinal image, why it is that we see world not upside down, although it's upside down in the time. He thinks that his theory can explain this. He thinks that he has a new theory of the horizontal moon illusion. I'm not sure whether it's proper called illusion, which again is something that differs from an account given by so-called geometric theories of vision, although at that point it should be emphasized that the so-called geometric theorists of vision gave a very different accounts of the moon illusion. So the examples are both negative examples and positive examples at the same time. And finally, sort of philosophical beef is at the end of the new theory of vision, where there is an argument, or I'm not sure whether it's an argument, but there's a claim that what Berkeley manages to show is that the ideas of vision, which are the proper objects of sight, composed of light and color, are entirely heterogeneous from ideas of touch. The ideas that we get from touching objects, which for Berkeley doesn't really give a proper theory of them, but it's fairly obvious that they include kinesthetic sensation, sensation of pressure, sensation of heat, sensation of surface. And it seems that it includes the movement of the body quite integrally. And finally, this is basically mentioned in new theory of vision, and later Berkeley makes a lot of it in his so-called metaphysical works, that vision is a universal language of God to us. Okay, so I have some of the quotes are a bit long. I should have printed a handout. Apologies for that. I will read some of them, but not all of them. Now, when I said that Berkeley's theory of vision is psychological rather than geometrical theories of vision, what I have in mind is, and this is Berkeley in theory of vision vindicated, but this is a nice summary of what's going on. I think this is very much in line with new theory of vision, is that the way to study vision, according to Berkeley, is not to engage in enterprise that was often called mixed mathematics, which means, as Aristotle would put it, that you study lines, not qua lines, but qua lines in nature. So basically it's applied mathematics. This enterprise for Berkeley is insufficient to account for our visual perception because of the problems I briefly mentioned. I won't go very deeply into them. But more importantly, the way to do the theory of vision is not to pay any attention to the lines or the angles coming from or going to our eyes, but rather just to concentrate on our own idea. So that's what makes it psychological. The theory of vision that Berkeley intends to give is given by attending to visible ideas. So and the visible ideas are available to us. And it's a good question to what degree, I'll get at the end of the talk, I'll get to that, about which are proper objects of vision and which ones are not. But in this sense, I mean, Berkeley's theory to be psychological theory. We're not engaging in a mathematical enterprise of how light is propagated into nature, or what is the the size of the retinoid, which seems not so important for Berkeley, but rather on how things appear to us. Also, how things appear to us is a good question what it exactly means. But it's supposed to be such that we should be able to be aware of it by just using our own introspection. Okay, and what's going on in this psychological theory of vision is that after identifying so-called proper objects of sight and touch, we are giving, or Berkeley is giving us a theory which shows us how we learn to connect, in this case, ideas of sight and ideas of touch. Of course, there are other sense modalities, and there are interesting questions, for instance, about ideas of hearing. Why is it that they don't compose geometrical fields in a way that ideas of sight and ideas of touch do? But Berkeley doesn't address the issue, and it seems true that our vision works by connecting to touch. So the question he's asking is, concentrating on the ideas of sight that we have and the ideas of touch, how do those two get connected so that we learn to see distance? That's the most important question. Of course, there's question of magnitude, situation, and so on, but these are all derivative of perceiving distance, and this is something that also Descartes has. So how we come to see things outside of us, in distance from us, and this takes it for granted that we do not see distance directly. So distance is a learned. We learn to see distance. Now, again, and I will say a bit more about that later on. Now, what's going on when we attend to these experiences is that and this is all new theory of vision, both these and the previous quotes. Yeah, Berkeley talks about habitual connections, he talks about judgments, he talks about suggestions, and these seem to be all pretty much synonymous in the new theory of vision. The terminology changes in theory of vision indicated. So here's an interesting, now I'll read this one aloud. I think this goes at the heart of what it is to learn to see distance in Berkeley. From all which follows that the judgment we make of the distance of an object, viewed with both eyes, is entirely the result of experience. So we learn to see distance. We don't see distance immediately when we open our eyes, according to Berkeley. If we had not constantly found certain sensations arising from various dispositions of the eyes, attended with certain degrees of distance, we should never make those silent judgments from them concerning the distance of objects. No more than we would pretend to judge the man's thoughts by his pronouncing words we had never heard before. So here's, first of all, here's an analogy to language, very interesting. And here's many of the cues according to which we judge distance, but this is just one of them, the tactual sensation that we have in our eyes, which is the disposition of our eyes, which is habitually connected to the distance that we perceive objects to be from us by our sense of touch. So the fact that our eyes give us certain sensual sense information influences the way we come to see things. Now, this is a question whether we see lights and colors and then infer from them unconsciously that those lights and colors correspond to, say, this chair approximately 1 meter from me, or whether it's the case that we really see the chair. And I think the latter is Berkeley's theory, that the proper objects of sight are lights and colors, but we never really see the proper objects of sight. What we see are objects at distance from us. And how this comes to be is that we've learned to see like that. It is seeing, but it's something that we learned from this habitual connection that there is between certain visual cues and the tactual distance of objects for Berkeley. So, and this connection it's constant, but it's arbitrary. So there's no necessary connection between, say, feeling in the eye and the distance of object, or the blurriness of the visual image and the distance of object. And this is the I think it's the heart of the comparison to language. That if we wouldn't know the meaning of language, merely hearing the words wouldn't tell us much. Okay. So that should suffice as a summary of Berkeley. Now here's Descartes in dioptrics. So there is a guy. So it's not just a myth. There is this guy who's watching at the end of the front of the eye, and that really plays a role in Descartes' theory. In fact, in dioptrics, not so much in other works. So what's going on according to Descartes? Well, several things. So here's the object, is the Vxy, and the light coming from the object goes through the lenses at the front of the retina, and there it is, TSR corresponds to the object. So the geometric theory of vision gives you that these angles remain constant, and when you move forward or backwards, well, actually when you move to the sides of the things, the angle changes, which correlates with the distance of the objects. And that's kind of a neat result. Descartes didn't invent it, it was known very well before, but Descartes did insist quite clearly in dioptrics that it is with the use of these angles and these lines that we evaluate, that we judge the distance of objects. And this is something that Berkeley very strongly opposes to. Now, the story for Descartes doesn't end there. And I think this is pretty interesting. So this one I said, for instance, that the inverted retinal image is not necessarily much of a problem for Berkeley. So what happens is that, well, of course, we have two eyes. Here's the object, which paints its image in the right eye, right? So YXV is here RST, and So there's an image in the eye. So unlike the previous image suggests, it's not at the front of the eye that we are looking at it. It's in the brain that we are looking at it. So it goes through the nerves to the front of the brain, and from there to the pineal gland. And that's where the actual visual sensation and judgment comes about. Now, the nerves in question look like this. So nerves are a tube. It's empty. It's hollow. It's filled with animal spirits. So the Ville balls, I think, are the animal spirits there. And the animal spirits, in the case of the optic nerve, their main job is to keep the channel open. They have an important role in making us move our muscles, but that's about tactile movement. In the visual sensations, what we have is a tube which is kept open by the movement of animal spirits, and within the tube we have these very, very thin lines, which are the nerves. And what happens is that the light coming from the object hits the front of the eye, from which the nerve endings, are located, and they convey this motion that the object has to the brain. And in the brain, there is a picture. Descartes is pretty clear about this in dialectics, which is formed by the motion of the nerves. So the nerves move by basically pulling and pushing and tickling. So that's the mechanism. It's not the animal spirits going up and down. It's the nerves which are stimulated by the movements coming from outside. In this case, light hitting the eye, which gives us the image in the brain. This is from Malebranche. Here's the first problem about this. Is Malebranche emphasizes this. It's kind of a variation of Berkeley's one-point argument. It's that you can see that the object, this is the original C, P, the angle of that object is exactly the same as the PO, right? Or what is this one here? This is H. So basically you can move the object forward and backwards unless you don't move it in horizontal line without the angle changing. So if we would judge the distance merely based on the angle, we wouldn't perceive change of distance. Malebranche puts the point such that this makes the distance prone to error. It's a sort of a thing about search of the truth, that errors everywhere. It's Augustinian emphasis that we are so limited, we're making so many mistakes. Here's Berkeley's counter. One of Berkeley's is a Barrovian case. So the first criticism of the geometric theory that Berkeley presents is related to Malebranche's theory. Is that first of all, we don't perceive the lines at all. Second of all, the lines don't change even if the object changes, and we perceive the change of the object. That's not actually a fair criticism of Descartes. I'll say why in a minute. I also realized I've spent way too much time.
It's okay.
Okay, so Barrovian case, very briefly. Object, this is the eye, I think, around there. The object is behind the eye, there's a concave mirror. The geometric theory gives us two false results. It shows the object in the wrong place, and it shows the object receding when it should be doing the other acting otherwise. And Berkeley thinks that he can explain what happens merely on the psychological cues, the faintness of the image, and so on and so forth. So this is an interesting case because it's a strict counter-example. It's not just that we don't perceive the angles and lines, it's just that the angles and lines gives us false results. We don't see what we're supposed to see if geometric theory is true. Okay, so what's the judgment of distance for Descartes and Malebranche? Here's a nice summary. I've just taken it from Walter Ott's new book. So first, there's the changing shape of the eye and corresponding change in the brain. So that's something, when the object moves, there's a change in the shape of the eye reacts to it, and the image in the brain equally reacts to it. Now, whether this is just a causal connection in the nature or whether there's a psychological element to it is a bit of an open question. Descartes is not entirely clear on this. So whether we feel the shape of the eye or not. So that's one cue. Second one is the relation of the eyes, and the change was that is the famous blind man with two sticks. We know the distance between the eyes and the angle they change, and this is something that's done entirely by the natural geometry. This kind of visual cue, according to seems, does not seem to be as available as merely on psychological basis. It really seems to be a fact about the angles of the lines from object to the eye. There's a change in position of a single eye. It's how we can see things at distance even if we close one eye. As a movement of the eye, and we do the same thing like that. And then this is interesting. Descartes mentions even in dioptrics the distinctness or indistinctness of the shape that we see. That seems a psychological cue. So, okay, Descartes is not entirely a geometric theorist, it seems. Also, the strength of the light is mentioned. I think it's I didn't check the. I'm not sure whether it's a bit unclear whether he refers to phenomenological brightness or to the actual fact that the light hits the eye with different forces. So this is something that Malebranche takes up, adds some things. He, for instance, has the strength of the force with which the object acts on our eyes. That's basically variation of this. Is an angle made by rays of our eyes. So Malebranche adapts this basically, and so on. Now, the question that Berkeley asks is, how is the natural geometry done? Children see, animals see, they can't calculate that complex. Even we are not able to do such complex geometry. Not to mention the fact that we are not aware of any angles. Now, Malebranche is a pretty straightforward. Malebranche is very aware of this, and his answer is pretty much God's doing it. God is doing it. So there's an angle in the eye. It's too complicated for us, but it has to be, for Malebranche, one of the aspects of vision. So we need God helping us to put these visual cues together. Descartes is more interesting. First of all, he speaks of something like a natural geometry. So he's kind of careful there when he speaks about this. Now, who's doing the calculation in Descartes? What would Descartes say to Berkeley's criticism? Now, one option would be that the brain is doing it. And this is not a very popular, I think Gaukrocher might be the only one who's defended the view in the literature. But it's a short 2-3 pages of the fifth discourse of dioptrics, and this is definitely a live option that maybe the brain is capable of doing it. Another option is that the mind is doing it, but and the picture of the little guy in the brain kind of indicates that direction. So that's also possible. A third option that it's mind and brain together, because some of the cues seem to be merely physical, geometrical, while some of the cues seem psychological. Okay. Now, I'm way over time already.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Okay. So let me just. I didn't quite get it. I'm sorry, very sorry for that. So this idea that judgments influence what we perceive. So this is the basic idea of natural geometry. This is the term that Malebranche uses, is the natural judgments, is all of these cues put together. There's a huge intellectual component there. So there are judgments rather than mere sensations. Now, Descartes seems to be committed to the same view. Locke is very clear about this, that ideas we receive by sensation are often in grown people altered by judgment without our taking notice. I'm not going to say anything about this. So, what Berkeley says in theory of vision vindicated. Now, this is Berkeley, this is how it's connected, I think. It's not a new theory of vision, it's really theory of vision vindicated, is that ideas which are observed to be connected with other ideas come to be considered as signs by means whereof things not actually perceived by sense are signified or suggested to the imagination whose objects they are, and which alone perceives them. Now, this I think is very interesting passage. It seems to me, to sum up a bit, is that we see things at distance, and the object of sight are such that we are never really capable of attending to just pure light and color. So the visual objects seem to be something that's already mediated by imagination. And imagination, we don't see factual things. We don't touch anything with our eyes. But we see things in a distance. Distance is properly only feature of factual ideas. So what's connecting these two in a way that we can have said to have a unified vision, which includes distance perception? It's imagination. And this is what the talk about judgments and suggestions is supposed to convey. Now, okay, I'm out of my time. Let me just repeat now without really having given much arguments for some of the conclusions. So first of all, why I talked about Descartes, Malebranche, and mentioned Locke, because that's a prehistory of judgments. And Berkeley's theory of vision, in the end, seems to be a theory of judgments, because it's by judgments that we connect ideas of sight and touch. And that's exactly what's going on with Descartes, Malebranche, and Locke. Now, the thing is that in Descartes and Malebranche, part of this work that the judgment does takes place in the brain, whilst in Berkeley, that's obviously not the case. But nevertheless, what is it that we see that our imagination is supposed to work on? Light and color. But we never see light and color as such. We see light and color as bounded, as of certain shape, as of certain distance from us. So isn't that kind of like Descartes' corporeal images in the brain? We never see them, but still somehow our judgments of distance are based on them. So this is the question, what is the proper object of vision on which these judgments are based? And it seems that what we see is always the mediated vision, things at distance. And this is, by Berkeley, quite clearly said to be something that imagination produces to us. Secondly, are we really making inferences? This is what Berkeley is often read in this sort of a direct theory, indirect theory of vision, that Berkeley is a procedure of Marr, for instance, that we get some visual information and then there's a machine doing lots of inferences, connecting it to factual information. I'm not sure whether that's Berkeley's view in the end. It doesn't seem that imagination is a faculty that would be doing much of inferring. It seems that Berkeley very clearly distinguishes suggesting and judging, that judging belongs properly to understanding, whilst imagination belongs to, well, what does it belong to? It's not a sense proper, it's something else. So whether we are making inferences, that's an open question, but we are definitely very active in vision, it seems, on basis of these early works on vision. And this I promised to end here. So what new theory of vision was supposed to show is that there's a real analogy to divine language and visual. That vision is a language, and this is, what does that mean? Now, the minimum interpretation is that it just means that there's some element of teleological argument for existence of God to be gained from Berkeley's theory of vision. That it's just an analogy. Now, maybe so, but maybe there's a deeper meaning to it. Namely that you remember the comparison to understanding words and seeing things properly, that is, associating the seeing features to the felt features, to the ideas of touch. So maybe the visual language can be understood so that we see something that's akin or comparable to meanings, as understanding the meanings of the words. So we don't see, you don't hear the sounds, right? You hear what I'm saying. You don't see the letters. You see what it conveys, right? And equally, when I see things at distance, I don't really see lights and colors, which conveys objects with certain magnitudes at certain distance. But this is such that there has to be an account of how the allegedly heterogeneous elements can be combined. So that is ideas of touch, which originally have the distance, and ideas of vision, which originally don't have it. And perhaps this is the meaning that we construe the meanings between vision and touch, but that connection is arbitrary. And since it's arbitrary, we need God to somehow ensure that to happen. Now, to what way? I mean, Berkeley doesn't seem to accept Malebranche's conclusion all the way down that it's God doing all the work. But still, how can it be that visual meanings come about from a visual world which is completely lacking visual meanings, such as magnitude or distance? And perhaps this is the meaning of the visual language as the language of God.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.